Hello, everyone. Hey,
Hello.
John, Jack, Eddie, how are things? How are you guys?
Good, thank you. Good. How are you?
Fantastic.
Good to see everyone.
Yeah, nice to see you all. I don't think we can hear you, Thomas. I don't know why. It might just be me.
Is that better?
Yes, there we go.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. Great to have you guys on board this evening. It's hard to believe that we are at the 6th of November, 23 days away from Black Friday. Feels like the year has absolutely flown by. Really flown by. So really looking forward to diving into this evening. Got tons of great questions from a lot of our customers, a lot of people who've submitted questions through LinkedIn this week, through the sign up forms, that kind of thing. Hoping that everybody can kind of chime in and ask a couple of other questions as we kind of navigate through this next 60 minutes. But before we dive in, guys, it'd be great for all of you to kind of jump in and give a quick intro to who you are and what you guys do.
Yeah, cool. Got me to go.
Yeah, you start, so Jack.
Cool. So yeah, I'm Jack. I'm one of the co-founders of Prospa. We're a D2C growth agency, really specialising in paid social, paid search and retention to grow our brands. Currently operating with around 40 different brands, mainly across the UK.
Fantastic. Eddie, do you want to kick off next?
Sure. My name is Eddie. I am a co-owner of a shoe brand called VIBAe. We sell the comfiest shoes in the world. So my advertising company originally signed them as a client just under 3 years ago. And we very quickly took them to 8 figures, and after which I became a co-owner of the company itself. So yeah, looking forward to this roundtable.
Absolutely. And last but not least, Mr. Jon Blair.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Jon Blair, founder of Free to Grow CFO. We're the go-to outsourced finance and accounting firm for 8- and 9-figure D2C brands. Formerly, I was a CFO and founding team member of a D2C brand called Guardian Bikes. And what our firm does is we help fast-growing, really profit-focused D2C brands scale alongside healthy profit and cash flow. So excited to be a part of the discussion today.
Absolutely. Guys, let's just dive into it. We've had a good few questions come in. Obviously, the format here is going to be as much Q&A as possible. But we have a question in, first one here from Brian Rosenthal. He asked, hi guys, I guess it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on how to measure the ROI of a BFCM or Q4 campaigns over time, both from a revenue standpoint and a profit standpoint. Going to open the floor. Whoever wants to take that one first, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can jump in on this one. So the question is the right way to think about measuring ROI, both from a top line perspective and a profit perspective of the promotional campaigns that are run through during Black Friday. I mean, at the end of the day, this is going to probably be the beginning of a broken record on my end. It's contribution margin dollars, right? And contribution margin dollars, for those of you who are not fully familiar with the term, that's your revenue minus all of your variable costs. So that means the dollars that are left over after you pay for landed product costs, shipping and fulfillment, credit card fees, and then your variable marketing spend. In this case, especially when you're in a heavy promotional period, that includes the variable cost of discounts, right? And so to accurately measure the profitability of your Black Friday, Cyber Monday advertising campaigns, you have to have the ability to calculate what your contribution margin dollars are, net of all those variable costs and after your marketing spend, because that's truly what's left over. That contribution margin dollars, that's what's left over to cover your fixed overhead, and then hopefully more than cover your fixed overhead and go straight to the bottom line and drive profitability. It's even more important that you use contribution margin dollars in a heavy discounting period than it is the rest of the year, because your contribution margin dollars per order before ad spend, or what some people call fully loaded gross margin before ad spend, the dollars per order are different when you're discounting heavily. because all throughout the year, you probably have much lower discounts. You have a gross margin gross margin dollars per order that's higher than during Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And so you have to account for the fact that you're going to have a lower number of gross margin dollars per order. But the theory is, off the ad spend that you spend during that promotional period, you're going to do so much more volume that the order volume overcomes the lower margin dollars per order. And that's just we could talk this whole webinar about that, but like that's the high level of why you have to use contribution margin dollars.
Absolutely. And I know, Jack, even just from you guys, working with you guys, obviously at Prospa as well, it's probably a similar vein of thought. But even just to answer the same question, then again, even if you had a different spin on it, how do you guys look to measure, the ROI during BFCM Q4 campaigns over time? Again, both from a revenue and a profit standpoint.
Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it? I think something we look, heavily into over time, obviously, is LTV. I'm really trying to understand, over a period of time, what is the actual value of them customers that we drove in over that Black Friday period. Obviously, that time period will change depending on each brand. So, for some of the subscription brands that we work with, we'll look at that LTV period as a bit smaller, maybe 90 days to 180 days. Some of the kind of higher value businesses that are selling, products at a higher value with a higher AOV, we'll look at a much bigger time period. So I think it's really trying to understand, obviously, in that Black Friday period, you're going to be driving a lot more new customers into the business, and then it's really trying to understand, over that next time period, what's the value that they equate to. I think obviously using Store Hero has been a great help for us with this, using the cohort analysis, and obviously you can find out a lot of good stuff through things like Shopify as well. So we really use a lot of cohort analysis to understand, especially looking back from into last year as well, what impact those new customers had on the preceding 12 months after that period.
And even, I suppose, just on that, Jack, so like even as a through line from John's point, are you trying to like scale heavily, obviously going into Q4? Are you trying to have a smaller, are we trying to inflate CAC to drive way more new customers? And are we okay with maybe a discount where we're going to take on less gross margin per new customer? Or how do you think about that?
I think it's completely brand dependent, really. So some of the brands that we work with, again, more of the subscription side, we are heavily discounting for that first purchase because we're completely fine on breaking even. But then we've got some brands who, again, they're selling much higher value items. They want to protect their margin a bit more because their COGS are a lot higher, for instance. So it really depends on the brand, in question, the products that they're selling, and their, the economics behind their products as well. So we're doing a bit of everything, really. Just, I think you've got to approach it completely bespoke with every brand, depending on kind of, I guess, where they're at currently and where they, what they want to achieve over that period. For instance, one of the brands we've got over Black Friday, they really want to focus on, I guess, getting rid of a lot of stock. So with certain products in their inventory, we're discounting heavily, and then we're not so much on the kind of, I guess, the newer, more full price stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's the same with any situation. It's really just brand dependent.
Absolutely. Obviously, Eddie, with VIBAe, the comfiest shoes in the world, how are you guys thinking about that kind of, I suppose, balance between revenue and profitability at the peak time of year?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with what Jack was saying about the variability of all these e-com brands, right? There's no one solution that fits everybody. So when you're looking at a measurement to base your decisions on, you got to look at your own cash flow cycle. You got to look at money in versus money going out. What's the time involved in that process? How aggressive do you want to be during this peak season when maybe costs are higher in your vertical, your niche? Maybe you got to compete harder, in which case you might have to compromise some areas. So you've really got to understand, going back to what Jon was saying, understand your numbers, your economy, and reverse engineer that. You just got to also survive, get through this season as well, and make it out the other side and continue that momentum going onwards too. So.
And to echo something that both Jack and Eddie are saying, what we're dancing around here and what they're talking about is it depends on your brand strategy for this particular time period. And not every brand strategy is going to be the same. in any given Black Friday, Cyber Monday, let alone in different Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And so you have to zoom out and you have to look at the totality of the business's strategy. And as Eddie pointed out, it's not just a P&L game, it's a balance sheet game too. That's where the cash flow comes into play. And so you really, I would say, to summarize it, you have to be multi-dimensional. You can't look at one metric. You have to look at the holistic set of like multi-dimensional metrics that you are measuring the success of your current strategy on for this time period. And that's what you use to measure success.
Can you give an example of two like diametrically opposite like strategies there, just for people? Like, is there a certain game one brand type of brand should be playing versus another brand?
Yeah, so I think a big piece is understanding product category, and part of that leads to what is the repeat purchase profile, right? And so when you have a brand that just, they have almost no, we'll call it just, they have no LTV accumulation over time. Generally speaking, if they're not super overstocked on inventory, they need profit maximization on every single order, because there is no profit coming down the line, because there is no accumulation of LTV. On the other side of the spectrum, if you have strong repeat purchase, you may look at Black Friday, Cyber Monday, that you may not look, you may actually give on profit maximization for the promotional period, and your major goal is just acquiring new customers, because you know there's a lot of stickiness and you've got LTV and accumulation coming after the holidays. And so again, one of those brands is looking to make as much money bottom line in Q4 as possible. The other brand is not necessarily concerned as much about that. They're looking to maximize how many new customers they can acquire that are going to stick and accumulate LTV over time. And so those two strategies can fly in the face of one another, but it's about understanding the profile of your customer and your product category, and understanding what you can't do is bet on LTV and it's not there. Don't do that, right? And you just have to understand which camp you're in and align your strategy accordingly.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, next question. We'll fire this one to you, Jack. So this one is coming from Laura Dolgy. She's asked, maybe just on projections and looking at the actual profitability of Black Friday. I know so many brands just throw out discounts and actually don't fully consider their actual cost of goods. Curious just to get your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, a lot of brands don't consider that, which is crazy. But I think it's looking at your COGS, but also looking at your cost of delivery. So including everything, not just the actual cost of producing, one unit. Because when you take into consideration all cost of delivery, you get to your gross margin. And as Jon mentioned as well, we can obviously bring ad spend into that as well to get to the contribution margin. But I think when also looking at discounting, you also do need to take into consideration LTV, as we mentioned there. I think we've just to, build further on what you said, Jon. We've got a brand that we know typically they're a supplement business. Use time is 30 days. We know when a customer comes in, they stay on average for 6 months. Obviously, we're going into January soon, which is obviously really good for wellness, health and wellness. So we've agreed with the brand, we're heavily discounting over Black Friday to break even on that first purchase for new customers. And we can set that because we listen all the unit economics behind each bundle. We also know typically when we drive a customer in, on average, they're going to stay for that period of time. So I think it's just understanding all the different variables that go into it, and then you can really drive a decision from there. But like you said, you don't want to set things blindly, because that can be really detrimental, especially at the moment with CPAs rising pretty dramatically. I think you need a real grip on every penny or every cent at the moment.
That's a fair point, but I suppose it is it's a discount heavy time of year as well. And we see it certainly all the time, and I'm sure all of you guys see it too. How do you think about discounts, as they factor into what your actual cost of goods are? Is there any kind of ways that you think about it brand specific, or is it very, very different depending on the industry and the brand itself?
I think it is different. I think something else to consider is AOV, which is, we do a lot of bundling over Black Friday as well, which gives us that extra revenue, if you like, because we're increasing that metric. So I think AOV is another lever that you can look to pull to obviously drive that extra revenue, which just gives you a little bit more breathing room with your CAC. and everything else really as well. So I think it is, really brand dependent, but I think there's also other strategies you can do around other metrics to allow you to then operate slightly different. I think, like I said, it's just having a real grip and understanding on every key figure, and every key offer as well, because I appreciate, there'll be different kind of discounts per different offer. So, but I think it is just, making sure you've got clarity on every aspect, but also just looking long term as well, not just now.
Absolutely, no, couldn't agree more. It's discounts can often get a bad rap, but I think they are necessary at different times of the year if they're used properly with a good strategy behind them. I certainly don't see an issue. Eddie, we might jump to you next. So we have a question from Daria, and she has asked us, how do we keep momentum after BFCM? Obviously, the purchasing window is getting smaller and smaller. Like a lot of our brands, even on Store Hero, will see anywhere from like 50% of the revenue happen in the last 3 months of the year. Even within that last 3 months, the vast majority of that buying is going to happen within a 6-week window. Black Friday is later than ever this year. We're starting on the 29th of November. How do brands keep momentum post BFCM?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There's a few things we can think about here. One thing that I think a lot of people do is they switch their focus and they forget all of their evergreen campaigns, all the normal BAU stuff that they were operating on, and go all in onto the Black Friday promotional merchandising offers. And they kind of neglect all of their campaigns that were running beforehand, or they switch everything over. And that's a huge mistake, because you want to have that skeleton, that backbone running, right? That fallback when this season passes. So that's a really, really huge one that a lot of brands, I think, miss out on. I think one way to do it as well, and this is actually going back to the discount thing, VIBAe, where we try not to be a discount brand. We sell very premium shoes, very high quality products. And so we don't want to slap a discount on every, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. One thing we did was just try to be creative around the promotions. How can we still drum up some hype and some interest and generate some demand without defaulting to discounting everything? One thing that we're doing as an example this year is we're promoting a gift card type of offer where, hey, you spend, buy a €500 card at a reduced cost, and you can gift that card to somebody else to spend the full 500, right? So there's creative ways where you can play around to try and find what offer sticks. And so that's something we're doing as well. One thing you can do to keep the momentum going is just test offers. Some other brands we're running as well is every week we're trying a new thing. Maybe one week we try 20%, next week we try 10%, next week we try buy one, get one free. And then as you progress through this Q4 season, you're going to start seeing, oh, these offers are doing much better than the other ones. So let's say post-Christmas, okay, bit of a dead period. Why not drum up a new campaign as a New Year's offer and just rerun the best performing campaign that you had a couple of weeks back, because it popped off. So try to use that, leverage that information, that result that you gathered there, and apply it in a period of time when you could use that extra boost. So that's one way you can kind of circle back to it.
I was just going to say as well, if that's all right. I think something that we've obviously made sure is in place for all brands is really solid retention automations as well. Obviously, you're going to have a lot of people coming in, to your email list throughout the Black Friday period. So make sure your welcome flow is fully optimized. So again, you can just really take advantage of that new influx of new customers. And I think a lot of the people that came, were acquired over Black Friday, they were enticed with a discount. Looking at some sort of incentive on the run up to Christmas doesn't necessarily have to be, discount led. I think always works as well, just to kind of keep that momentum going. If they purchase through a discount over Black Friday, there's, they're highly likely to do so again on the run up to Christmas and into the new year. So just a couple of the things that we've got in place with all of our brands this year.
One thing too, Thomas, that we see that works really well is the time between Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Christmas. Make sure you're ready to go on a solid FBA strategy on Amazon, because there's this rush of people buying after your 3PL cutoff. Your 3PL maybe takes 3 to 5 days to get to customers. So the cutoff for Christmas delivery is actually earlier than Amazon FBA, which promises 2-day shipping. And so one thing that most of the brands we work with that have a Shopify store and an Amazon seller store, they're making sure, like a month ago, we were planning out how much stock to have in FBA for the holidays, because all of a sudden your Shopify store will kind of die off because you've reached the cutoff for your 3PL, and the volume will really take off for several days on Amazon. So that's another one that we see work really well.
Really interesting point actually about Amazon just having that, I suppose, USP of fast delivery and how it becomes useful as unprepared buyers like myself start to do their shopping as too late in the season. So yeah, no, really, really good point, Jon. Next question is for yourself, Jon, from Harpal. Harpal has asked, it'd be good to understand the CFO's take on attracting buyers. Does steep discounting justify the short-term pain for the long-term gain?
I mean, honestly, a big part of the answer to this question comes back to the LTV piece, right? Because there's a lot of brands that I've worked with at Free to Grow that, in the past didn't really understand this. They didn't understand the repeat purchase profile of their customers. And if the LTV is not there, it actually isn't going to just show up out of nowhere. LTV, generally speaking, is a product development driven kind of financial metric. It's not a marketing metric. Now, keep in mind, if you have really terrible like retention practices on email and SMS and things like that, is there low hanging fruit to improve retention? 100%. But you're not going to take something that has no LT. You're not going to take a product, a durable good, for example, that has no LTV and get better at email and all of a sudden get a bunch of people materially like repeat purchasing. So you have to understand the repeat purchase profile, and that's where you're going to, and there's nuance here. It's brand specific. You got to take into account the balance sheet, how much inventory you have, and several things outside of the P&L, but just strictly speaking about the profitability of each customer you acquire or sell to during Black Friday, Cyber Monday. The juice is worth the squeeze potentially if either with a discount, you still have healthy enough profitability on a no LTV product, right? Or a high LTV product that you have data on that shows the stickiness and shows how LTV accumulates over time, that you can acquire that customer at whatever margin it is that you need to pay itself back and become profitable over several months. So one thing we do at Free to Grow, we build out these cohort analyses where we actually express or calculate your LTV in contribution margin dollar terms, not in revenue terms. We call it Free to Grow. We call LTV in revenue terms. We call it LTR, lifetime revenue. But so we'll actually build out a 12-month cohort model showing how many contribution margin dollars you accumulate each month. And what you can do with that is figure out what CAC you can afford during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, inclusive of a discount, right? And you can figure out with your LTV metrics when you've accumulated enough contribution margin that you pay that CAC back and it's actually profitable enough. And so that's kind of a little bit about how I think about that from a financial standpoint.
I think that's such an interesting point, and I know, Eddie, we even touched on it on a call actually with VIBAe a couple of months ago, just understanding the LTV actually of a brand, and the V component of that is often one I see a lot of brands get wrong, where they're determining lifetime value as actually what you've articulated there as lifetime revenue, and that they're very, very different things. If you're purely trying to build your LTV to CAC models based on a revenue lifetime value as opposed to an actual gross margin value over time, you're going to be left in a very, very sticky situation very, very quickly. The question for all of you, is this something that you guys see a lot of brands get wrong? Is it something that you have systems in place to help them articulate or understand a bit better?
Our firm has recently placed a very focused emphasis on this because we're starting to see how incredibly important it is. You can't just say, I want X in revenue and Y in ad spend, and that's my goal for the month, because underneath that is layers of revenue and margin dollars. And the first couple layers to consider is how much of that is first time customers and what's the margin dollars of that, and how much of that is repeat customers and what's the margin dollars of that. And what we've started to realize is when you're scaling really fast. So what does every brand want? I call it every brand wants the scaling, have your cake and eat it too, which is what? Grow crazy fast and be super profitable, right? And I've been on this quest to figure out, like, is that possible? And yeah, exactly that, right? But and what I've realized as we've worked with more and more brands, what makes that possible or not possible is how quickly you can increase repeat purchase velocity to subsidize first time customer purchases in any given month. Because if your velocity, I call repeat purchases your margin subsidy, right? The faster that goes, the faster you can take those really high margin dollars with no acquisition costs and put them back into first customer acquisition and keep that flywheel going and still generate a lot of profit. But if that repeat purchase subsidy velocity starts slowing down, you have less margin subsidy and you got to slow down first time customer acquisition, or else you're going to see your weighted average margin start dropping at the company level. And so we're actually starting to do things like that LTV CAC analysis that I just mentioned. We're also starting to do things like break out the P&L and say, here's your contribution margin dollars for the month driven by first-time customers, and here's your contribution margin dollars for the month driven by repeat customers, and looking at that every single month. And just those couple of things start to become really eye-opening to these brands, and they're like, oh, shoot, like I'm not thinking about this the right way.
I got a question for Jon. I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I'm a pretty big proponent for keeping things as simple as possible, especially for new and fast-growing brands. So for a new and fresh, fast-growing brand, what would be your kind of advice in terms of what to look at? Because a lot of times these brands, they haven't achieved something that you don't know what you don't know because you haven't got there yet. So how do you slowly start to add these data sets and incorporate that into your decision making? Curious your thoughts on that.
I think the first one that you can do that's actually rather simple, you may need an accountant to help you, or store heroes to help you calculate gross margin dollars, fully loaded gross margin. So that means inclusive of all your variable costs except for marketing. But is to pull your cohort data right out of Shopify. It's right there, and take that, which is revenue, and multiply it by your margin percentage, your gross profit margin percentage, and re-express that whole table in gross margin dollars. Because once you do that and you see that's what you actually keep, then down the left side of that cohort analysis, put in the CAC for first time, like the first order CAC for that exact cohort, and start looking at what was the CAC to acquire that cohort, right, per order. And then what's the gross margin dollars I have in month 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you just look at that, it's completely game changing and eye opening. We do that very early on working with our clients, because it really starts to highlight what it does. Is it kind of highlights the answer to that ever pressing question, like, what CAC can I afford? Everyone wants to know, what's the CAC I can afford? That starts to really answer what CAC you can afford. And then when you look at that, you sit down with your agency. If you come to them and say, hey, I want to reach 100 million in revenue at a $25 CAC, what are they going to say? That's not possible, right? And so you can start looking at how fast other brands, your agency can go, well, we're scaling all these brands at these speeds and their CACs are this. You can start to get a sense of what's possible and what's not possible, right? And it doesn't answer, it's not a crystal ball, but it really starts, you really start understanding like what's reasonable and what's not reasonable in terms of how fast you can scale at any given CAC. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very smart.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a game of, just saying, how do we consistently lower our CAC? It's like, okay, how hard can we scale the business while our CAC increases? And if we can make sure that those customers keep consistently coming back to us, it means that we can have an allowable higher CAC and ultimately scale the business without any major trade-off to profitability.
Totally. I'm starting to realize, Thomas, honestly, that the brands that can grow really fast and profitably, they just have really high gross margin dollars per order that can absorb a CAC that's going to get worse as you scale, because that's just how it works. CAC is going to get worse. There's going to be diminishing returns. So you have to start with gross margin dollars per order that are as high as possible. And then obviously if you can layer in repeat purchase, that has like a multiplier effect on what kind of a CAC you can absorb as you scale.
Brilliant. Obviously, guys, keep popping in questions there. We will get to them. Any questions that anyone has in anything, we will get to them at the end. Next question for yourself, Jack. It's come in from Chris Ogle. He's asked for D2C brands. This is a really interesting one, actually. For D2C brands, how do you manage the temptation for smaller brands to resort to discounting when sales are maybe below where they might want them to be, particularly as we come into this time of year?
Yeah, I think it's always tempting, isn't it, to pivot towards a discount if you're not seeing the sales revenue that you want to see. But I think unless obviously you're going into Black Friday and stuff, it's a bit different. But I'd always try and look towards other reasons why people might not be converting, and I would never just go to discounting as kind of a first solution. There's a lot of different things that could be causing that lack of conversion. I think brand positioning, it could be price in general, to be fair. There's a lot of different factors that you need to look into. So I'd really go through a kind of analysis process first before going towards discounting or heavily discounting. I think we worked with a brand pretty recently who was a really nice brand. They look great, but they were discounting really heavily across their full store, and they hit a revenue ceiling that they couldn't get over. And when we looked into the brand, we kind of restructured the website, we restructured the content, we gave it a much more luxury feel, and they're selling women's wear like £150 AOV. But they were really hitting a revenue ceiling. And once we'd restructured the whole website, the content, we really kind of elevated everything, removed a lot of the poor products that weren't selling, and then removed all the discounting as well. We've now seen revenue really soar from just a few changes structurally within the brand. So I think I know it's really obviously tempting to think, obviously, if we reduce price further, that's going to then lead to more sales. But I think there's always potentially more problems in the structure of the brand, or the buyer journey, or again, there's so many factors that you could look into. But I think going down the discounting route and sticking with that can be, so detrimental. Like you said, Eddie, try to stay away from it as much as you can. And I think that's something I'd always, advise, because you don't want to damage, the longevity of the brand either, or the customers. Because I think you can also get into that habitual cycle with customers where they expect discounts as well. So for me, I just think, really kind of strip the brand back and try and understand, are there any other weak points that are leading to the lack of conversion, opposed to just trying to discount all the time.
Just on that, Jack, so were the brands kind of heavily discounting before?
Yeah, site-wide.
And how did you find kind of breaking out of that cycle? Because it can be really difficult once you start getting into that spiral of being the brand who's consistently, you're waiting for the end of the month, that 20-30% off emails come in the door. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of work to structurally change how your customer thinks about the brand once you even start that cycle.
Yeah, I think they also had a bit of a problem with returning customers. They weren't really receiving anyone. Everything was new, to be honest, which has probably played into our advantage, because we could almost kind of restart in a way. So that's definitely helped us, because a lot of their customer base weren't coming back, and there's some quality issues with the products and stuff that we've managed to fix. So that's definitely helped us. But I think it would be tough to break out of that cycle. But I think you just got to, go with a plan and stick with it, and go full in if you're doing it like that. I think for us, the restructuring the website was one of the biggest things, and we've really stripped it back, really kept to a very kind of precise tone, and then made sure that's consistent across all organic and paid content. So the full ecosystem around the brand now is very consistent. And obviously, it's taken a little bit of time, but we're now, fully on track and moving in the right direction. And I think before that, the brand owner was in such a mindset of, discount was the way, because, a further reduction in price is going to then, bring more people in. But, he couldn't get over that revenue that it was at previously, sorry. So I think, that definitely helps. I think if you've got obviously a high amount of repeat customers, it's going to be a bit of a bigger challenge. But I think just sticking with that strategy and maintaining it and just staying consistent with it across all channels. And then, like I said, just building that consistent ecosystem around the brand with that message, over time will start to work.
I think it almost goes back to show me the incentive and I'll show you the way. If the operators within the business aren't focused or driven by profit, they ultimately will be KPI'd on revenue. And an easy way to increase your revenue is to be not lazy, but just slap a discount on there. You will hit your revenue target, but you will have sucked a lot of the margin out of the business that it was set up for initially. So I think that's such a good point, and it sounds like you did some really good work there. Next question, guys, is out to the floor. It's come in from Adam Wilshurst. He's asked, what methods or tools do you recommend for accurately forecasting demand during peak shopping periods? And secondly to that, how can we leverage historical data to prevent overstocking or stockouts? Who wants to tackle that one?
I think for the first part of the question regarding forecasting, I think a lot of brands tend to forecast from kind of the top-down approach by kind of, deciding on a revenue target and trying to work out how to get there. I think the approach we take is really building from the bottom up. So looking at a lot of historical data across, new customers, and then breaking that down further from AOV, CAC, spend, and then looking at repeat rates. We kind of break repeat customers down into two areas. So we've got active, non-recent, and recent customers based on when they were acquired, and obviously looking at churn as well. And I think once you've got all those kind of four areas of data, you start to then paint a bit of a picture on, if everything remained the same, how the next period of time is going to look. And then you can obviously make certain changes within spend, CAC, and things like that to then see how that's going to impact, revenue outputs across, again, that future period of time. But that's kind of how we approach forecasting, is really from a bottom-up approach rather than top-down. Because I think, you're going to get a lot of inaccuracy if you go top-down approach.
I second that. I think I also think it's better to be overstocked than understocked. So it's easier when you have a year-on-year comparison, because you can say, okay, we're growing 40% higher this year, so let's stock 40% more. Or let's just say going into Q4, rather than stocking for 3 months, let's stock for what did we do last year, including January of the following year, right? Just overstock a little bit more than what you think you might need, because worst case scenario is you're just going to sell on after the season ends, right? The worst thing that can happen is you run out of stock and you can't capitalize on this, this opportunity. That's the worst thing that could ever happen.
So on the demand forecasting side, there's a lot of brand specific nuance here, but I would say that there needs to be some form of model that I know this is probably gonna sound like a broken record, but you have to have something for what's your demand forecast model for driving new customer demand, right? And that's going to really come back to what does that CAC for first time customers look like, and overlaying that against how much we think we can spend, right? And then really digging into the LTV repeat purchase data to understand those cohorts to see what kind of demand you're going to get from previously acquired customers, right? And coming back and repeat purchasing during that period of time. And the point I want to make is that you have to have a couple layers. You can't just have a single demand forecast layer where it's just like ad spend times a blended ROAS equals revenue. That's overly simplistic. If you don't have any other data, then you might have to do that, right? And so that's the other nuance, is just you have to go with the data that you have in the season of the brand. It's really, like, I'm not going to lie, I'm a CFO. When you're the newer the brand is, the harder it is to forecast. But I will say, from a forecasting best practices, when you're in a situation with limited data or high uncertainty, that's when you have to resort to running scenarios, because the only thing you have is what if this happens, what if that happens. And so early on in early stage brands with very little historical data, you pull what you can, whether that's like Google Trends data showing like, search term data, for volume for your product category, or you can pull on Amazon to see the same thing for your product category. So like try to pull some seasonality and volume data from other sources, but then you're going to have to run scenarios, like downside scenario, middle of the road, like best case scenario. And this is where financial modeling really comes into play as a very valuable tool, is that like our CFOs, we build out what are called 3-statement financial models, meaning it's a projection of the P&L and the balance sheet and the cash flow statement. And so what we're able to do is say, if you're in a situation of high uncertainty, which, let's be honest, we work with a lot of early stage brands, so there's a lot of uncertainty and very little data at first. We're running these different scenarios on the P&L, and then we're going back to the balance sheet and the cash flow statement, and we're looking at, well, what if we bought this much inventory and we hit this really crappy sales number, right? And so you can see, can you afford to stock up for the best case scenario and hit the worst case scenario, and will you still survive? And if not, we're doing this months in advance before we cut the PO. So we're like, do we need to raise equity? Do we need the right line of credit in place? So oftentimes what we'll do, we have a brand that last Black Friday, Cyber Monday, they loaded up on a massive amount of inventory. We had no historical data to go off of except for the previous year. And so what my analysis was, all right, what if the owner buys everything they want to buy? And what if they hit 50% of their sales forecast? What if they hit 40%? What if they hit 30%? And what I saw in my financial model was, even if they hit half of their sales forecast, they still would be able to survive. They'd be very heavy stocked, but this is a product that's not going obsolete. It's not perishable, right? And I then worked with them and a lender to put the right line of credit in place that would finance an overstocked inventory position for long enough. And guess what? We did not hit the sales forecast. We came out of last year with way too much inventory, but they lived to fight another day because we had the right debt facility in place. And going into this Black Friday, Cyber Monday, they've almost had to purchase nothing new since last year. But again, it's not obsolete. We have it financed with the right debt facility, and we have been liquidating that inventory little by little since last year. And by the end of this year, with a conservative and I think very achievable forecast, we should come out in a much better spot, and they're going to be able to keep growing. So the moral of the story is, when you don't have enough data, you need a CFO who can help you look at both balance sheet and P&L implications and help you to place what I call risk-adjusted bets based on scenarios.
Great point. I think it's always getting that balance between ambition and reality, and how do we make sure the numbers, the math, I suppose, to a certain extent. But no, really, really interesting thoughts from everyone there. So thanks very, very much. Next question we're going to jump onto is from John Walker. Eddie, we might throw this one your way. So he said, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on maximizing the use of data acquired after Black Friday. He said, I have my own thoughts on this, but I'd love to get some insights from others. So obviously we're coming into a time of year where, brands are going to be achieving the vast majority of their revenue in a very, very small period of time. What can they do with all of the new data that they're getting, and how do they use that to, I suppose, maximize and fuel the growth for the following year?
Yeah, good question. I suppose the easiest way is just to start segmenting all the different customers coming through your door. Who are they? Where do they come from? What's their behavior? How much are they spending? And then you can leverage that information next season, or next year when you're coming around to the same situation. And that's actually quite something that happens often, is you do see seasonality in businesses, right? Ups and downs throughout the year. So you want to make sure that you can understand, you want to be able to recognize as early as possible that first signal of, okay, churn's about to happen, or this level of disinterest is going to start happening. So these are the signals that you need to recognize and find ways or systems to implement and plug in those holes. And that's ongoing, to be honest. That's not something that you want to look at just seasonally, but that should be something foundational to your business.
Absolutely. You don't start that conversation in the week before Black Friday. That needs to start months in advance, and needs to be an ongoing thing, obviously. But yeah, no, really, really good point. Definitely want to be underscored there. Topic to the floor. This one has come in from Florian. He's asked, an interesting topic would be asked how to maximize your profitability without preventing stockouts, i.e. kind of price adjustments and marketing budgets in general.
So the question is how to maximize profits while preventing stockouts, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we deal with this trade-off all the time with our clients at Free to Grow, right? One answer, just to reiterate, is just playing off what I just mentioned, which is like, it comes back to capital structure. Capital structure means how much excess equity or access to debt does your brand have to purposefully over order inventory, because you can do that. It's not like a black and white, don't ever order too much inventory. There's a way to strategically do it, but you have to know how to forecast the impact, and you have to know how to put the right, usually debt structure in place. And the things to consider, you have to know how to go to the right lenders who are willing to finance that there's the right time horizon and maturity date, meaning when that debt's finally due, right? What some of the other covenants and requirements are for that debt to not trip a default and to get called, the note to get called while you're sitting in an overstock situation. So the strategic use of debt, which a good CFO who understands e-com and consumer goods can definitely help you do. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that if you are, it's inevitable you're going to stock out, right? Or it's likely you're going to stock out and there's nothing you can do about it. That's when we see our clients oftentimes resort to, sorry for the agency guys on here, but cut unnecessary ad spend for that period. If you don't think you're going to be able to replenish your inventory coffers in a timely manner, I wouldn't just do it blindly. Because if you say you can place an order and get inventory a few weeks after you stock out, you may lose momentum by cutting that ad spend back. But if you're going to be in some sort of a longer term stock out, you might want to follow the theory of constraints and make as much profit as you can on each of those units. But that's kind of a call that's kind of a judgment call that you have to make. And then there's raising prices to slow down sales velocity and maximize profit per unit if you're heading for an inevitable stock out. Those are some things that we see brands do.
Is that something you guys run into at Prospa, Jack?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this year especially, we've taken a lot more time to plan around. Obviously, we've got a lot of primary products we're going to be focusing on throughout each offer, but we've taken a lot more time to plan around a lot of the secondary products as well, just to, in case we do hit, I suppose, good problems like that. I was going to ask Jon, actually, regarding the increase in price, when would you kind of bring that in? Like, how would you approach increasing price to obviously slow down that order volume?
So I've several instances where I've seen this play out, and there's a couple things to consider. One is, are you in more than one channel? And specifically, we'll say Shopify and Amazon, and thinking strategically about like the cross-channel pricing to try to slow down one channel or the other. The other thing to just keep in mind, though, is if you have a retail presence, right, you might run into an issue. Like if you've got, and I've seen this happen before with brands where they're in Target, or maybe they're on Amazon Vendor Central. So Amazon's the retailer and you're the wholesaler. When you lost that control over pricing, you've got to be very thoughtful about this strategy. But generally, Jack, like there's kind of a stair-step approach, like, because you don't want to just go so crazy that it breaks something in the funnel and you're just like, oh shoot, what have we done? And so there's this strategy of like, we'll raise the price $10 and we'll do it for this period of time. We'll watch these specific metrics to see what happens. And then depending on what happens with those metrics, we'll go another $10, right? And then we'll wait and we'll watch these metrics. And so the point I'm making, you got to be super intentional. You've got to sit down and go, what are the channels across, or what are the prices across these different channels? Which channels do I have control over the pricing over, and which ones do I not? And then what's our plan to methodically raise it a little bit at a time? And what are the funnel metrics that we're watching that we will use to decide if we keep going or we stop or we retreat? And so you do that planning ahead of time. Certainly you can adjust the plan along the way, because you're learning every time you make a change. But those are some of the things that I would like advise brands on doing if they want to go or need to go that route, they think.
We had that retail issue today, actually, where with Superdrug, they just cut the prices of one of our clients' products quite considerably. And that's, it's just changed our plans slightly. So
totally.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point, though, Jon. As you've seen kind of the inventory levels start to diminish, think about margin expansion on the existing product line as a whole. Really easy way to kind of just get that piece of margin expansion, I suppose, writ large, which is really, really interesting. GA4, a question here has come in from Breeze Grogan. GA4 has obviously been a bit of a hot topic for a lot of brands this year, last 18 months. Maybe Eddie, I'm not sure how kind of close you are to GA4 at VIBAe, but Breeze has asked, in terms of the topics, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts about GA4, any good alternatives that they're using to correctly attribute channel performance. I'm feeling that GA4 is not accurate enough or too slow in general.
I agree with the too slow in general. So maybe one of you guys can provide a more constructive answer to this one. But I don't like using GA4 at all. For those reasons exactly. I feel like the time, the resource required to just maintain and manage the platform isn't worth the benefit, because especially with fast growing D2C brands, you're moving very fast. You're trying to take feedback signals and action on them as quickly as possible. You can't afford to faff about with all this stuff. And, you can't afford to miss opportunity. And measuring things like NCCPA, MER, these are things that you can measure without GA4. So that's kind of my stance on it.
Yeah, I agree on that. We use, I guess our kind of reporting stack is Store Hero, then we also use Triple Whale as well. We've just found that to be the most accurate third-party attribution tool. So we kind of use Store Hero as our front-end financial reporting tool for clients, and then we use kind of Triple Whale as like a back-end, I guess, decision-making tool. Yeah, we've not had the best experience with GA4. There's just a lot better alternatives, in my opinion, for that. And I think the total impact attribution model used in Triple Whale has been, like we found that to be the most accurate, because they use a lot of different data points, to drive that, I guess, that source of truth. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything, John, on GA4.
We're not really using it too much on the CFO front. We're using Triple Whale a lot more. And at the end of the day, like, we always advise brands. I mean, and I don't want to say something that I feel like is like totally like cliche and obvious, but attribution is an imperfect science, and it's similar in many ways to the way that we think about forecasting and financial modeling. It is actually not there to give you a perfect representative model of the world. It's there to give you a few different viewpoints on what might be going on. And in general, if you can kind of triangulate between a Store Hero and a Triple Whale and any other kind of more aggregated metrics you might be calculating, whether it's new customer CPA and new customer MER and things of that nature, and your LTV data, you kind of triangulate those and go, hey, I see these moving in the same direction. And so that's got to indicate that we're doing the right thing or we're doing the wrong thing, right? But it's never gonna connect the dots all the way down to the channel ad spend level. And I'll say furthermore, it gets harder when you have an Amazon store, right? And you're spending heavily on top of funnel, which is most of the brands that we work with. We've got a brand that's spending $2 million a month on Meta, and they have an Amazon store. And like, what I want everyone to hear that I think is helpful is to just know, if you've got different agencies, you've got an agency that are that are managing these different ad channels, it's actually up to you on the brand side to work out how they all think about their own attribution. It's not going to be up to them. The Amazon guys are going to say, we're driving all these sales. The guys doing top of funnel ad spend on Facebook spending $2 million a month are going to say, no, it's us, right? But it's up to you, the brand, to figure out what methodology you're going to use to determine like what the actual estimated channel performance is, because those different parties are not going to like get together on the same page and agree to that.
Yeah, I think shifting everyone's, from a client perspective, shifting everyone's mindset to looking at everything very blended is something that we've been advocates of more this year. Just because, like you said, John, it's becoming very hard to get any definitive, source of truth. So I think as long as everything is moving in the right direction, as you mentioned, I think that proves growth, which is why we're now leading with Store Hero. I think it's educated our clients massively in a lot of different ways, which has been more beneficial for us. And then in terms of the third-party attribution stuff, we're kind of trying to keep that, I guess, on our end. So we use it for our decision making, and they see the benefits of that through Store Hero, because they can see the growth from a blended perspective. They can see what they've spent and what they've got back out. And we're kind of looking at, Meta, Google, TikTok really now is just purely new customer drivers, and then your organics and retention channels is what's bringing the customers back in. And I think that mindset shift has made things easier for people to understand, but also appreciate what's working behind the scenes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. It's just, I think we're seeing a big shift industry-wide, just a move away from just marketing metrics to more blended but harder line actual financial metrics, and that's the gauge. A lot of brands are really starting to use it to quantify the success of that kind of paid marketing spend. So yeah, just echo all of the above, really. Last question we're going to go to here is from Samuli from Brancoy. Question here is kind of more about seasonality and maybe trade-offs that BFCM might have in terms of how it actually affects other components of the year. One question, could this BFCM thing have been really big last year. So how important is this season? And also from a profitability perspective, how is this season compared to other seasons? Last conversations I've had with clients has shown me that order volume will increase a lot, but there are certainly a lot of side effects that will then affect the whole business. I think what we're trying to get out of this question is like, is there adverse consequences to really just going completely gung ho, or putting the pressure to make the last 6 weeks of the year really, really work? Some of the brands that we're working with definitely have an all-in strategy for the very, very end of the year. Maybe trying to spread the year out a little bit more, trying to create almost 4 peaks throughout the year as opposed to just one kind of Hail Mary peak towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I think we work, again, it's obviously brand dependent massively, but we've got a ski wear brand that, obviously their peak season really is from September right the way through to March. So obviously that, for them, the majority of their spend is going into them 6 months and that kind of half of the year. We're also seeing we're kind of seeing peak seasons change for certain brands. We work with a lot of sportswear brands, and we're actually seeing, May has become now also their peak season as well, with people preparing for summer. So I think, again, it really just depends on the branding question, but I think trying to accurately forecast as best as you can based on historical data, I think is the best. You're going to put yourself in the best position to then spend properly. And I just think taking learnings from previous years, one thing that we learned when we started working with that ski brand, when we looked at their past data, was they could have spent a hell of a lot more during peak season because their CAC was so low. So that then's directed our forecast to really throttle it more. And obviously now we're we're going to be in a much better position. We already are this year as well. So I think something along them lines of just trying to forecast as accurate as you can, using as much data as you can.
One thing I was going to mention is considering the concept of what we in finance call concentration risk, right? Concentration risk can exist if you're a wholesaler and you have one customer who's 80% of your sales. Concentration risk can be most of your customers are acquired through Meta, or you're really concentrated on Amazon. But there's another thing, it's concentration risk of revenue volume around a specific time of year. So there's a brand that I work with that's doing about 40 million a year in revenue. And we were actually planning out their Q4 several weeks back. And what we identified was that the annual forecast, 65% of the profit that we were forecasting for the year was forecasted to happen in November. And so really a 4-week period, right? And so this was actually a couple of months ago. I sat down with the leadership team and said, hey guys, this is a huge concentration risk, because if we miss November, it has an outsized impact on how big we miss for the whole year. And so we started talking about what can we do to get more sales in September and October, anything we can shave off this 65% of profit, which for them was $1.6 million. Any profit we can pull forward into September and October is a huge win to reduce the concentration risk, right, in November, which may knock us off our skis for our annual plan. And so we actually did the company's first ever Labor Day sale, and they crushed it. And did it maybe pull some sales forward? It maybe did pull a little bit forward, but it reduced the risk of, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong in 4 weeks during November. Your ad account could get shut down. Something could screw up on the site. Anything could happen to screw that up and make you fall victim to that concentration risk. And so they're now going into planning for 2025, and they're thinking about how they can plan out their promotional calendar to actually try to smooth out sales somewhat throughout the year. There's a seasonality to their product category, but they're trying to get creative on how to reduce that concentration risk of $1.6 million need to be generated in profit just in the month of November.
It sounds like some pretty concentrated risk indeed. Last question, we're just going to take it from Jen here in the audience. That's a quick question there. So we'll just do a quick fire round to everyone here. But for everyone on the panel, what's the light bulb data or metric that you see brands not realizing that they capture that they really should be analyzing?
I think contribution margin is probably the one I would say for that.
Agreed.
And I'll just say LTV expressed in contribution margin dollar terms.
Pretty resounding answer there, guys. Absolutely. Listen, that was fantastic. Honestly, thank you so much for coming on. Just a little maybe quick fire around here. If people are looking to get in contact with you guys, where can they find you?
Probably LinkedIn. Jack Smith, good luck finding me because there's a few people call the same thing. Jack Smith and Prospa is my agency.
Yeah, I'm just Eddie Cheng on LinkedIn as well, VIBAe.
Yeah, and you can find me, Jon Blair, on LinkedIn, and then freetogrowcfo.com for our CFO firm.
Brilliant, guys. Thank you so much. We'll send out the recording to everyone here. If anyone has any questions, obviously, please get on to any of the guys or get on to myself directly. More than happy to connect you to anyone on the call here. And just from a store hero perspective, just want to say a massive thank you for everyone for jumping on. And we'll chat to you all again very, very soon.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.